Hello, Roosevelt. This is Mr. Wazo. Um, this week, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about storytelling and memory. And I subtitled this "Presenting from the Inside Out" because the process of storytelling goes both directions. It's helpful for us as adults to tell our own story that can be quite healing and reparative, helping us be more responsive and less reactive in our own endeavors parenting children. And also, it's very supportive of nurturing a whole brain child's development to give children support in telling their own story and filling out details and context, and bringing the connection between felt experiences and perceived ideas, thoughts, and feelings. There are two kinds of memory. They're implicit and explicit. And you can kind of track the two by thinking about implicit memory is unconscious. It's not something that you can retrieve without a great deal of effort. And it comes typically from a somatic experience of big emotions. And the memory is in a way carved into your neural network so that when you have an experience similar to the one that started the memory, you can react very quickly. And that's related to our fight flight response, as well as very useful when we're trying to learn procedures that it's not very helpful if we can actually have it all in our conscious mind, like driving a car or riding a bike. In contrast, explicit memory is um, generated through a process of reflection and forming connections. It's conscious, and it's really easily verbalized. That we can find ways to structure the retelling of a memory that makes it comprehensible to another person. We can retrieve from lots of different parts of our brain the different elements of the experience and weave it together into a coherent story. And this is very useful when we're trying to remember things like recipes, formulas, or talk about our family. And it's um, driven by the hippocampus primarily, whereas in contrast, the implicit memory is directed by the amygdala. Um, and I titled this as Prison of the Past. And there's good news and bad news. That's a phrase that comes from Dan Siegel's work, where sometimes we can feel very imprisoned by our past experience and at effect by those experiences and unable to repair them now that we're grown up. When in fact, brain research is showing that we are creating new neural pathways throughout our life. And it is possible, very much possible, to retrieve experiences from the past and bring them into explicit memory, which leaves us less reactive and more capable of responding to similar events. And with children, we're often triggered and sometimes don't really know why. And the good news is that it's possible to find out why. And I'm going to illustrate that with a story. Um, so this story begins in Pecos. My husband and I had the opportunity to live on the Pecos River for some time, and we would go walking on the river. And one day we were out walking and wading in the river. It was a hot day, and unfortunately, Al had an allergic reaction to something that was happening there, and he lost consciousness and fell into the river and was in danger of drowning. Fortunately, I was there and could pull him out of the river, and he recovered. And a short time after that, I left and flew out to Seattle, where I was doing something with my family, and tried to get a hold of Al one day, and he wasn't answering his phone. that ended up being related to something long in my past, and it resulted in unreasonable panic. So the setup was something unfortunate happened to do with water, happened with someone I care deeply about, and there was distance involved and uncertainty and unknown. And after a lot of reflection, I realized that my unreasonable panic was coming from something that actually happened when I was about 6 years old. And I have a memory from being 6 and in a classroom with our first grade classroom teacher named Ms. Robin. And one of the students in my class, a friend, had been absent for many days. And finally, our teacher told us why. And what had happened was his father had drowned in a boating accident. And one of the effects of being told that story by my teacher about my friend was that I developed a unreasonable panic whenever my parents would leave the house. And it was pretty much inconsolable and unmanageable for a few years, and baffled my parents. And I had no way of describing, I couldn't make that connection. But from this perspective, it's pretty clear to me that I had a big reaction to the news about my brother, projected my experience onto his, and was terrified that my parents would die. And then way later, many years later, similar context, waiting in a river, a loved one, and distance set up a reaction as though I was 6 again. All those big feelings and not able to think through them, but just react. So after that, I did a lot of reflecting on where did that big response come from that was hard for me to manage and resulted in some panicked phone calls and other things that happened. I dragged some friends out of bed to go look and see if Al was okay. And it took a long time to sift through all of that. And I didn't really have a lot of tools at my disposal to understand. And I'm going to share with you a couple ways to deal with big emotions and memory that are applicable not only to you, but also as you work with your children. This works both ways, so inside out. So just to reiterate, implicit memories cause us to form expectations about how the world works, which is that panic response in response to a stimulus. The brain is primed to go in that particular groove when the stimulus is close enough to the previous experience. And so when children are responding in surprising or unreasonable ways, one thing that we can consider is perhaps this is coming from a prior experience that they haven't worked through yet. And SIFT is an acronym, and it stands for sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And it's designed to help you remember to use all of the brain that is available to you, not just the ideas, thoughts, or not just the feelings, but to integrate the whole package. And so you can play games where with children where you're asking questions from those 4 domains. Do you remember, was it a warm day or a cool day? Do you remember, were you feeling a little scared or were you more excited? Do you remember the words that your dad was using that time that he hit his thumb with the hammer? Maybe that's not what you want to remember. But the idea being that you are training yourself as well as your child in the full dimension of memory. And for adults trying to sort through their past experiences, a good place to start is the sensations that are associated with events. Similarly with kids. Another game that is kind of a game that you can play is called Remote of the Mind, where sometimes if a child is dealing with an experience that was really hard, they're very reluctant to talk about it because it means revisiting it. And so if they have a sense of control in the retelling, it can help them overcome that resistance. So you can use an old remote control or help them imagine one where they're in control of how fast the story is related, that you can pause the story, that you can skip over parts of the story, you can go backwards and retell other parts of the story. But having control in how the story is related can be very helpful in overcoming resistance to working through difficult topics. Um, and in conclusion, I just want to package all of this in the endeavor, which is building resilient, thriving individuals, where the process of memory and storytelling and support all build our ability to be empathetic, to have self-awareness, insight. The rich and full complexity of detail encourages all the parts of our brain to work. Sifting is a great approach to working through our own experiences as well as helping children work through theirs. And it's all about connecting, always about connecting. And thank you for listening. And I wish everyone all the best.